Is this thing on?
I think so. The light's there.
All right. Hey everyone, this is Pat.
This is Posh.
And this is the Founder Hour podcast.
We're glad you're here.
We have a big episode coming up, but before we get into it, we just wanted to remind you guys to please
subscribe,
leave us a rating,
and a review,
and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook at
The Founder Hour.
Thank you guys for being here. Spread the word and
enjoy the show. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Founder Hour podcast. I'm your co-host, Posh.
I'm Pat.
And we're here in Venice with Nick Fouquet, founder of his namesake brand, Nick Fouquet.
That's right, baby.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. This is great.
Glad we finally made it happen.
Nick, we want to kind of get started off in the early days, right? Your upbringing, where you grew up, how you grew up. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, my upbringing plays a huge role in terms of the aesthetic of the brand and sort of helps me the creative elements of what I do today. But I was born in Manhattan, New York City in 83. And looking back on my life, there's just so much like moving around. After being born, quickly my family moved to the southwest of France where my father grew up. And French was my first language, and until like kindergarten, I was in the southwest of France. And then after that, we moved to South Florida, which was a big transition. And because my mother's family was there, and we'd go back and forth every summer to the southwest of France and spend time there. So I was able to keep refining. And
I would never be able to tell that your first language was French.
I know
it's crazy.
It's like. It's really,
yeah.
Even when I go to Paris, I'm in Paris and I'm like walking around, I speak fluent French, like just as well as I speak
say
English.
In French so we could get a sense of the.
Like, qu'est-ce que tu veux que je te dise? Que t'es un beau gosse, t'es là, on est tous ensemble, Venice Beach, Los Angeles.
Wow.
Mais ouais, enfin,
you play both
quoi.
sides really well. That's
yeah,
good.
I know. But so I'm like in Paris, like just recently, and like I'm like, bonjour, comment ça va? Je veux un croissant et un café. Like I want a croissant and a café, and they talk to me in English. Back in English, because I look so American. It's
similar to like we're Armenian, and I went to Armenia for the first time this past year, and it was the same thing. Like I would try to speak like my perfect, Armenian,
and
all of a sudden they're just
English.
like, they know I'm a foreigner. Like they know I'm not from Armenia.
So you were super young when you guys moved to France?
Yeah, to France. And again, I'm really like European East Coast, but everyone thinks I'm like from there. Like, well, I thought you were from LA and California. I'm like, no, not at all. I've lived here for like 12 years, but
yeah.
Why
did you? So how old were you when you moved back from France?
When I moved
to Florida. Oh, you said you were just going back
I was about
forth?
6 or 7 when I moved to South Florida.
Okay.
Yeah. And then after that, I got to, after grade school in South Florida, I got shipped away to New England to boarding school because, like, that's what East Coast families do. And, like, a better education. It was fucking awful. It was the worst. I hated it. Like, got kicked out of one and then got sent to another one, which is an all-boys one. And it was just, like...
Yeah,
it was awful.
But growing up, I guess did that moving back and forth, did that affect kind of just like your social life at all, or just being able to, I don't know, make friends and keep friends and be around your friends all the time?
It affected my not really, but it definitely gave me this sort of it gave me a bicultural upbringing where today I'm so grateful for it because, there's just so many things I'm grateful for having that upbringing. Just seeing things in a different way. Friends growing up in America had this American upbringing, and I had sort of this other twist and take on life that I saw, across the way. It was really important.
Nick, why did you move to France?
Well, I think that, my mother wanted us to have this bicultural upbringing. And I think at the time, my mom's a bit of a Francophile, and going back to the southwest of France seemed like a, good upbringing for the kids, which it was, small like fisherman town, and that's why.
Was your dad working out there?
My dad wasn't working too much out there. My dad sort of took a hiatus. He's model, and he sort of took a break during that time to help raise with my mom, and then got back into the game after we were.
Was he always a model from a young age?
Yeah, my dad's been
Really?
a model since
I thought he was one of those guys. Maybe like as you get older and you just get like, I mean, a lot of people
Like you
don't
age
age
like a
well,
fine
but he aged
wine.
like really well, and he just
Yeah.
became a model because there's a lot of people like that too, or even actors, like a lot of actors like that.
Yeah, pop off later. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, my dad's been popping off forever. You know, since I remember, he was on the cover brochures of like restaurant ads. You go, I'm like, Dad, you're here too. It's like, yeah, free steak.
For those
dinner.
that are listening that don't know who Nick's dad is, just search Bernard
Fouquet.
Bouquet, and
Yeah.
you'll see. You're probably seen him all over Instagram. Yeah.
Nick, I know you grew up with 5 sisters and your mom, so 6 women, and I can only imagine how interesting and challenging that can be. But how was that like? And obviously, having your dad be this pretty well-known model at the time, how did you feel about all that? And what were you really like as a child? I know we'll get into the whole getting kicked out of boarding school a little bit after, but just kind of growing up, what was it like in the house?
I mean, I was a really shy kid, and I think to some extent today I still am. The nature of my business, being what it is, in the name of it being me. Like I had to put on this sort of this character and act, because I'm like
An introvert.
introvert for sure. And so being with a bunch of sisters, growing up, was pretty interesting. I kind of got, I don't want to say I got bullied or picked on, but it was I kind of did by my sisters, and I love them, and I love women. I find such a close attachment and relationship to a lot of women and girls in my life, and they, my sisters were all artists. They were musicians, actresses, writers, dancers. And I think being the only boy, I back then I mean I popped off later in life, and I always was so admirative of them, and go up on stage and play piano, and do all their creative endeavors, and I wasn't, I didn't think I had that bone in my body, and I just I love my sisters. I'm so grateful to have grown up with all those girls, although sometimes it was really difficult. A lot of drama, and a lot of times in the months they were angry. I didn't know why. Now I know why.
Now you know why. What kind of things were you into as a kid? What did you kind of spend time doing?
Well, one of my little sister, who's like 14 months younger than me, is my best friend even today, and we were into skateboarding and just just skateboarding around town, and I saw actually when I think back about it, and when you were young, you could get cigarettes, and we'd skate around and smoke cigarettes. But I was also kind of a dork. I was into computer games, playing Nintendo and watching TV. That was my thing.
So a regular kid, nothing crazy.
Yeah, nothing crazy, nothing crazy. I wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us what happened at school. Did you not like school?
Well, cigarettes lead to drugs, I guess.
And this is while you're at boarding school.
Yeah, so I got sent to boarding school when I was 14 or 15 in a school in Massachusetts called Brooks, who, funnily enough, after they kicked me out, keeps sending me letters for, to
Fundraising.
to give them money, and I had to call them and be like,
I barely came here.
guys, I got kicked out. Why do you want my money? And they stopped sending me those letters. But, it was just trying to be a part of, and I felt sort of very different, and being French, and kind of from Florida, and a little dorky and chubby. I was just met this guy who, I don't know why I'm telling this story, but who I thought was so cool, and he ended up being the weed dealer for the school, and I got busted. I got busted with him hanging out, and got sent to an all-boys school, and that was going to military school, and it was kind of tough. It was a tough transition, but I think I learned a lot a little traumatic, but I learned a lot.
It sounds like you were almost like a rebel after you came back from America and were kind of put in these positions. Why do you think that was?
I just think I've always had the urge to do things differently and be different, and I think I like to just like try things and experiment. So, but I wouldn't say I was like a rebel and like a bad kid. I wasn't. I was a good kid. I was tame.
Did you finish the all boys school?
I did. Yeah, I graduated. And yeah. And then I went to a school in California called University of Redlands outside near San Bernardino, which I was like, oh man, I'm going to California. And like, it was
Whack.
It was, yeah, not Laguna Beach.
What did you think like you would do like career wise? Did you have a plan or
No, not at all. And I think growing up, I'd always put so much pressure on myself to try to figure out what I wanted to do. But once you enroll in university or college, in the first year, they ask you to, find a major. And I think that's too premature for kids at that age to try to find out like what they want to do for the rest of their life. It's just such a big idea. And so I left University of Redlands. I went to Patagonia for about like 4 or 5 months.
so you dropped out of Redlands or you just like took a leave or
Yeah, I left. And then in the summertime, I was trying to reevaluate what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, and I was living in Topanga, funnily enough, which is where I live today. And my dad's not too far from here, but my dad's best friend is like a 60-year-old techno DJ, and he's living in Topanga, and I ended up living with him, this French guy. And he was like, I was like, yo, what if I like went to Patagonia in South America and just sort of like camped out and did this? He's like, dude, that sounds like such a great idea. You should go do that. And ended up, taking some money from my mom without her knowing and booking a flight down there and catching up with like an organization that sort of led these outdoor leadership programs, and it was fucking awesome. Like,
What was it called?
It was called NOLS, now National Outdoor Leadership. And didn't take a shower for 4 months and lived in a tent. And first week I wanted to leave, and I was like, what did I get myself into? And then like it was one of the best things I've ever done in my life.
I'm curious, like, what were like the main things you learned from that? Because it's funny you bring that up. I'm reading a book right now about it's the CEO of Netflix. He wrote a book about how the whole Netflix story came about, or the business, and he alludes a lot to his outdoor expeditions with a lot of these organizations and how it's made him become a better leader in business. So I guess for you, what were some of the things that you learned doing that I guess now you can look back and be like, wow?
Yeah, I should put a lot more thought and sort of like think back in retrospect of those experiences. But like some of the things off the top of my head is like, it takes a team, and like a leader like helps. A leader is there. Like I remember there was, we were going over this like ravine, and like every week or every other day we change leaders. And I remember one of the guys, I forget his name. This sounds like a trivial story, but it was actually like really interesting when I think back on it. And without him knowing, instead of him like jumping over the ravine and being like, guys, come this way, he like dropped his pack and helped everybody and took their pack and going off. And I remember like the captain, like the older guy, was like, that's what a leader does, And there was like things like that I think I also learned an amazing term that I still use to this day that came from that program was, a lot of people would complain and the guy would say, don't give me problems, give me solutions. And to this day, it's like I have people on my team that are like, like this buyer won't do this and that. I'm like, you're giving me problems here. Come here, give me give me 2 solutions,
Yeah.
And so that was like still something I use to this day.
And Nick, you're like what, 18 years old at the time, or?
Yeah, I'm like 17, 18 years old. Yeah.
Do you think that the 4 or 5 months you were there, or however long you were there, did you come back with this newfound sense and a newfound idea of who you were?
Yeah, for sure, and it's like interesting to talk about it now, but yeah, I came back and I definitely, had my eyes open, and I think then I'd caught the travel bug, because I'd been gone for 3-4 months. I was young, and that sort of led me to go and explore the world and get inspired. And I went to Australia. I went to, oh my God, I went to so many countries. Like I can't even, I went all over, like Nepal
And how are you making money while you're on these trips?
well, back then I was like, you could get like a flight. This was later, and you could work at like a hostel, and you could stay there for free, and they could give you some money, and then I'd come back and I'd bartend and I'd work, and then I'd go again. Like I wasn't like traveling the world for 2 years straight. Like at the age of 18, 19, 20, it'd be like in the summertime for like a month or two. My family would go to France, and I'd go jump to Egypt to go see my friend that was like working for like a chic millionaire like on the boat, and I'd go crash with them. And it was just like total budget travel back then, but I was so inspired every time I'd go somewhere, and I was like, this is like the school of life and the best education that I ever received.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like I'm sure a lot of your friends or the people that you knew that were like around your age were in college at the time studying something like that they thought they would do for the rest of their lives, but you're sort of out, getting all these perspectives from different cultures that maybe, just don't come across. Even in a town like LA where there's people from every culture, you still don't really get that real sense of what each of these cultures are.
Well, yeah, and Americans in general aren't known to be like big travelers, and you definitely see that when you're, out and about. There's like people from Israel, there's people from Germany, there's people from but Americans, like very rare that you come across an American traveler.
I'm curious, why do you think that is?
I think Americans think they got everything in America. But they do. We got beautiful places here,
We do. I think what we don't understand that if you're not exposed to other cultures and maybe like, for example, like their food or their architecture, you don't realize that like we don't have the same level of quality here in America.
It's a young country, you
like
know.
The
You go to
food
Europe and you see like a church
that's
that's
like unreal. Like I've never tasted anything like it just going to other countries.
Yeah, but so that all that, when I went back to school in Florida, I decided to enroll myself in environmental science and sustainable development, which to this day, I don't practice the principles of I mean, I do. We try to keep things as sustainable as possible within like the workspace and reduce our, plastic single-use consumptions. But, I think Patagonia and then traveling gave me a huge appreciation for conservation and preservation, renewable energies, and yeah, so that's what I started. That's what I enrolled in, because at that time, still, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, if I would have known I ended up becoming a hatmaker, I wouldn't have told my parents to spend a ton of money on a fucking education. Yeah. But would have been like, give me the money now. And I did tell them that
I'll start a business with it.
Yeah.
But so after like the 2 years of traveling, you went back to Florida, and that's when you enrolled in college again.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm curious. All this time up to 18, 19 years old. You're doing all this travel stuff. You're working these small jobs. Did you ever have any interest in fashion?
Yeah, I did. My dad was sort of by proxy involved in it, being a model. So he'd always come back with clothes. And my dad is a very, very stylish gentleman, and a huge inspiration for me. But yeah, I definitely always wanted to be involved in a part of, and like what I said, my dad go on production shoots, and so he was involved with like the models and the set designers, and I love that creative world so much, and it wasn't until later that I worked for a designer in LA who did reproduction World War I, World War II clothing, and had a brand of his own. His name is Christophe, and his store is still here. It's called Mr. Freedom on Melrose. And I just fell in love with the craft, and to see something come to fruition from start to finish, and then be a wearable piece of art was, to me, really just, I was just so in love with it. And I remember getting paid like, minimum wage, but I was so happy. And back then, doing fashion and being involved in that was not like, wasn't it wasn't what it is today.
It wasn't cool.
It wasn't, yeah, and it wasn't cool. It wasn't that cool for a heterosexual guy to be interested in fabrics and clothing, you know. But I'm European, But today it's like everyone's got their brand. But it's But then, what I do is so different than like just like starting a brand and throwing a label on it,
I mean, I think even like obviously the rise of e-commerce has made it a lot easier to distribute stuff too. Like even if you have a physical store, there's a lot you could do online that a lot of people back then couldn't. So if you weren't somewhere that you're easily visible or people know what you're up to, it's kind of hard to get your product out in a way.
Yeah, and I mean, social media obviously has been a huge tool.
You talk about your father being an inspiration for you in the fashion space. I'm curious, did you ever go with him or accompany him on any of the shoots that he had? Any people that, you met along the way that later became, a resource for you?
I mean, there wasn't that much crossover later, but I mean, the photographers that we saw, I guess, I went on some shoots with him and saw the world, and I mean, it was like a fun and entertaining, interesting world.
How so?
Well, I mean, you go on a set and you're like, who are these, they're beautiful, beautiful girls. And like, always like an interesting production guy, and the hair and makeup people were like really cool and funny. And so it's like this community and microcosm of creative people on location. And I thought it was so cool,
I'm curious what happened. So did you end up graduating from the environmental sciences program?
I did, yeah.
What did you do in between that time and working at the store here on Melrose?
Oh, well, that was actually later. I kind of jumped around, but like after I graduated, I went to New York and was sort of definitely did not use my environmental science degree at all, and worked at my friend's coffee shop, Nicky Mathers at the time. I don't know if you know who that.
You know Nicky.
Back then in New York, he just had this one place called Ruby's, which is on what's that street in Little Italy?
Yep, and now he has one right next to Stout in Santa Monica.
Yeah, but so I worked there, and it was next to this clothing store called Subi, and I should have worked at Subi, but I ended up working at Ruby's. And it was sort of like we're all like fashion models, and like would come, and I was just like this kid from Florida, and it was amazing. It was such a great experience, and I got to get a real taste of like New York City life and culture, and that was cool.
So what brought you to LA ultimately after that?
Well, I guess I've been like a bit of a nomad and like testing territories and going places, and I ended up. I then lived in Colorado for a year in Aspen, and then after that was, working as a ski bum, working at, painting and working at a restaurant. I ended up coming to see a friend in Venice, and I never really loved Los Angeles too much. And when I came to Venice Beach, I thought it was like the East, the Lower East Side with skaters and surfers, and I was like, man, I think I've found my Valhalla here. This place is awesome. And ended up staying here, and that's when I ended up slowly working for Christoph.
How old were you at the time when you made that move to LA?
20. I must have been 26, 25, 26. Yeah.
Mid-20s. And I know that's like an age where it's tough because like you're kind of finished with college, most people, and then getting into just kind of building your career, and here you are sort of just exploring life, trying to figure out what line you're going to go down, like where are you going to build something, right? Like how are you going to either build a career or make enough money to survive and all that kind of stuff. Were you feeling any pressure at the time?
Oh my God, yeah, so much pressure. I mean, I'd always put so much pressure on myself to try to figure out what my path in life was going to be. I saw a lot of my friends growing up in South Florida. Their families, own these huge businesses like sugar industry, like all this, like, and I was kind of envious of them because I knew that they would end up having sort of like an autopilot life. And there's something where, at that time I was like, oh my God, they know what they're going to do next. And, I didn't have those opportunities handed to me like they did. So I had to blaze my own path. And I didn't know what that was at the time. And I think like a lot of, young kids, especially today, don't know what that's going to be. And it's scary, it's just scary. And it feels like a lot of pressure because you look on social media and everyone's, traveling and doing their things and having their fabulous life. But, what do you suppose? What is one? You know, you got to follow your passion.
Yeah. I mean,
You
it's,
know, and
yeah,
it's hard to find your passion and
It is.
figure that out. Not everyone can, you know, and like that's why today I'm so grateful that I found something that's so random and sometimes like, yeah, it's so random, but it's like I love what I do, and I
yeah,
feel
let's kind of
so
talk about that
blessed.
because I feel like you bring up passion and it's an interesting word because I've definitely been more of like a consumer to try to understand what that really means, you know, and I think lately what I've been kind of like stumbling upon is, you know, you always hear like follow your passion and that kind of stuff, but like you said, it's really hard to find a passion, and it's not until you kind of fall into something that you didn't even know anything about that you sort of start developing that passion. And passion can be developed, and I think there's a misconception that like everyone, you know, if you just kind of sit at home and you think deep, you know, internally, you'll kind of stumble upon, oh, was my passion all along and I should pursue that. But generally those things are not your passion. They're just interests that you have. And, you know, passion often is really like something that you develop as you do something more and more and get good at it. So how did the whole hat thing come about?
I mean, it was like fully by accident. People are always like, "Did you go to school? Was there somebody in your family that was like a hat maker?" Like, no, not at all, not at all. It was a complete like fluke accident. And after working for this, whilst working for this guy in L.A., you know, and working on industrial sewing machines and making things with my hands, and having, you know, my sisters being creatives and me not being one, but really like blooming later. You know, I was like, I want to do something. You know, I was just ambitious and ignorant of what it requires and takes to build a brand. But I was just like, you know, so interested and so passionate. And I was like, oh, well, let me try to find something that's undersaturated. And everything at the time, when I think about it, even today, is so oversaturated. Denim and T-shirts and, you know, a lot of the ready-to-wear categories. And I stumbled across hats, seeing this guy, Western guy walking down the street wearing this cowboy hat. And I was like, where'd you buy that? And he was like, I made it. And I was like, what do you mean you made it? He's like, yeah, you know, I was working for a guy in Utah and sort of learned this craft. And at that time, it just blew my mind because I was like, what you mean you made this? And I was like, how? And he was like, well, you know, there's these pieces of equipment that are over 100 years old, and they're called like brim presses and, you know, flanges. And I was like,
Was he a hat maker, or he just happened to make it for himself?
he
and
was a
that's
hat
it?
maker.
Okay.
And so I was like, well, how do you get this equipment? And he's like, you got to go on the treasure hunt and sort of find. And all these guys at the time were like 60, 70-year-old, you know, Western cowboy hat makers, traditional hat makers. And I sort of, you know, made some money doing some modeling jobs because of my, you know, through my dad's circle and working for this designer. And I sort of started putting this money together to buy this old equipment. And I rented this old garage, this underground garage, which I just found the pictures to on Abbey Kinney, from this guy Bruce Wisnicki, who you know is such an amazing guy, and let me rent this facility underground, and slowly but surely started just tinkering away and trying to figure
How
it out.
long were you working at the store on Melrose? Like, did you get
Two
it?
and a half years.
So at this point, did you? You were obviously working like sewing. You were making clothing.
Yeah.
And I'm
And, like,
assuming
doing odd jobs and
I'm
then-
assuming you're pretty good at it, and you like enjoyed doing that, or
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was good at it. I just liked it, you know.
Yeah.
And that's when I sort of realized, like, oh, I found my passion. I found my path. I found something I love, which is in fashion, you know, which was clothing, which was garments, which was fabrics, which was creating something. And I just felt it made sense and it clicked, you know.
Nick, this guy that you talk about, I mean, this random guy, you're just walking on the street and you saw this guy wearing a hat?
Yeah, I mean, it's Venice. We're on Abbey Kinney and you're like walking down and ended up, yeah.
So did he teach you anything? I mean, did you guys end up exchanging contact information then?
Yeah, we did. We ended up even like working together, and I was like, let's partner up and do this. But, you know, as unfortunately, I think a lot of partnerships, they you know, dismantle as quickly as they get set up. So it was an unfortunate, you know, series of events, but, you know, it just didn't work out. And so then I was left with, you know, since I'd put up the capital I had all this equipment. I didn't have a partner. And then I had an opportunity to move above ground at Bikini, and I like rolled the dice. And looking back on it, there's a lot of times in this business that like were make or break moments, or sort of like, I wouldn't be here today, but I took the chance and sort of like re-upped on the investment.
What year is this?
This is 2011.
So what was the plan? Like you would just make hats and
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's like looking back on it, like the plan was like stupid, right? It was, it was like
but what were
there
you,
was no plan.
but
You
what were
know, I didn't go to
envisioning? Like,
business. What?
like what were you envisioning at the time? Like you would make hats and then how would you sell them?
Well, when I look back, it's like kind of ridiculous, but that I would slowly continue to, create pieces that I would sell. At the time, there wasn't a market for, expensive luxury hats that were handcrafted and handmade. And
Yeah.
I sort of had to build out like a niche for that, which I think I did. And, it was just sort of like, look, I remember being like hiring like my first blocker, first seamstress, and being like, look, I only have enough money for the next 6 months. If it doesn't work out, like I'm just letting you know, like I'm gonna like shut shop. And they, and that was back then, and that was 6 years ago.
And how were you getting the word out at the time? Like
It was super organic. It was super organic. We were working in the back house of this place on Abercrombie, and people would come in and.
oh, so they like it was visible to the street. Like
It was
a
visible
store.
to the street,
Okay.
and that was that was like a game changer back then. And I had people coming in. I had stylists. I had I had Bob Dylan's people come in. We were making hats for Bob Dylan, and then Madonna's team came in. And
Do you
then
think it was just like the location then, or what?
yeah, I mean, with
Yeah.
retail, it's all about location, location, location. Those are like the three criteria to.
Yeah, and it was called Nick Fouquet at the time.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I changed it. It was Nick Fouquet. Yeah.
You know what? I'm just trying to process this. You had no idea that there was even a market?
I didn't.
I mean, but like, why even take that risk? Luxury hats.
I mean, I'm 20, I'm 20. I just was, I don't know. It's just, I didn't overthink it, I didn't overthink it. And people, again, it goes back to passion. People were, I know this is like the founder's hour, and this is about probably like a lot of like, people with net worths with over, or maybe not, maybe I'm wrong. But to me, it was just like, again, going back to passion. People, if you think that I would have started a luxury hat business because I wanted to be a millionaire, you're wrong. This is the wrong business to get into, and I have an amazing living, and I afford myself the opportunity to live in Los Angeles. By no means am I a, multi-millionaire. I have a very comfortable living, and I'm super excited. But I started this because it's something I fell in love with. It was a passion that became an obsession that turned into a business. I didn't start it because I was going to be like, I'm going to sell my company for $200 million. I would have gone into tech, or I would have tried to do something completely different. I did it because I had a creative urge, and I ended up finding my voice in the craft and becoming an artist, not knowing that was what it was going to lead to, and just doing something that I loved, and I was just fortunate that
Yeah.
it was to work out. But there was no business plan, there was no game plan, it was nothing like that.
So what do you think, I guess, drew attention to people like you mentioned Bob Dylan, like these really big names that everyone, I'm assuming, is trying to get to? And he's just an example of one, but like all these, like a lot of people in the fashion space want to put their clothing on celebrities so everyone can see it, and all of a sudden now you blow up in your brand, right? What do you think caught their attention? Were they just, did they just happen to walk in one day and they're like, that's it, this is awesome?
Yeah, I mean, hats are just an interesting accessory, and for artists, whether you're a musician or an actor, it gives this allure of character and being interesting. I don't know how it all really unfolded. What I do know is that we've never gifted any hats to celebrities or any hats to, in general. Like, rarely do I even do that, because there's so much, craft, and these hats are expensive because the raw materials are expensive in themselves. But what I realized is these, people were doing my marketing for me, and I was like, if someone wants something, they shouldn't get it for free. They should pay for it, especially if you're a really rich celebrity. But
it's funny, right? A lot of times, like the richest
but
people
that's
don't
one
have
thing, and you can ask anybody on my team. It's like I'd rather give or gift a hat to the retail guy down the street that doesn't have any money, that really loves the brand and wants a hat so badly. I will give a hat to that person, but not to a multimillionaire who's like a famous actor. There's no fucking way. To me, that doesn't make sense. I'll buy a ticket to go see your movie. You can come fucking here to buy a hat,
Yeah.
And I think like what happened is, by the nature of the real estate of hats and where they sit, like eyewear or hat, like it just would never get photoshopped out, right? So I was really fortunate that in terms of like marketing, it was sort of luckily done for me.
Were you someone who wore hats all the time?
I didn't growing up, my stepmother, she's not around anymore, but when when we were in France, because I go back in the summertime to visit them, she worked at Hermes, and she brought me back a gift, which was a hat from this company called Mottsch, Motsch, which was bought by Hermes. And she gifted it to me, and I was like, immediately, it was like, wow, this is the difference between like, this is a beautiful hat, And I think that I saw the quality, and was wearing hats from then on. But I wasn't like growing up as a kid wearing hats all the time, no.
So, what was there a moment? I guess when you open this store and there's people walking in, and you start seeing some really big major people taking an interest in what you're doing. Was there like a moment where you're like, whoa, there's like I'm building a business here. This isn't just hanging out, making hats, and hopefully somebody buys them. There's like more to it than that.
I mean, yeah, I think it's like you hire one guy, and then you hire somebody to help you with the administrative tasks, and then you hire a seamstress, and then you see it slowly building, but you don't see it because it's sort of like happening in real time. It's like, I don't have kids, but I'm sure it's probably the same thing. It's like I see someone with their kids, I'm like, God, your kid got so big. They're like, really? Like,
yeah.
But I think that's sometimes how an organic business like really grows. But yeah, I always attribute like looking back, like a substantial kind of like change in the metrics of it all is when Pharrell wore our hats in the Grammys. And so did Madonna at the same time.
Was it the really big one?
It wasn't. That was a Vivienne Westwood hat. But he then did an outfit change and did like a performance with Daft Punk and Stevie Wonder, I think.
That's right.
And then, that's when I look back, like things really changed, and headwear. And then I started making a lot of Pharrell's hats, because they were like, we're trying to move away from this, crazy, this crazy like hat that's sort of becoming like a bit of a mockery. And so we had to sort of like adjust his image to make it more everyday.
So I know it's pretty well known that you have a very unique technique when it comes to how you make your hats. You literally light them on fire, right? Is that something that you started doing from like the beginning, or did you develop that over time?
No, early on when I was learning the craft, it was actually a necessary step in order to making the hat and making it silky and smooth. But I think I'm pretty ADD, and I think I just maybe let it go a little too long, and I was like, fuck, what do I do? And I tried to sort of like save it and see what I could do. And, I realized it was like an interesting patina in it. And I think it's something I learned early on, was like, you always in life want to look for those happy accidents. And that was one of those, where even when I'm designing a collection, whether it's for Paris, like I just try things. And if it's like I cut it too much, or it like, you kind of go with it. You follow the system through and see what it comes out to. And those are what I call the happy accidents. And I like pray for those, that they happen, because you just got to be in tune and aware in the creative process of doing things. You can't premeditate those things.
Right. Because I feel like just being, anything creative is one of those things where you obviously take a lot of inspiration from things that exist. Right. But sometimes, it's not that like our brains can't think that far or think that deep into something, but it just something happens where you're like, whoa, like that could really be something cool.
Absolutely.
That you just could never, like you said, premeditate. You could never even attempt to do it because you don't even know that that's possible without actually giving it a try and then something just happening out of it. Like whether it's art, whether it's music, whatever it might be. I feel like there are a lot of really, I've heard myself like people in the studio making a song and then they make this sound and all of a sudden they're like, I'm going to put that as the background of the beat. And all of a sudden it's like the main thing of the song.
And with that, you have to have to some level a certain amount of business acumen. You can't just, be full blown like artist guy and just like create pieces. You have to figure out a way to like commercialize it and sell it, but I think the creative part is something that you have to work like a muscle. It's like going to the gym. That's what I've learned over the years. You can't just like, sit at home and be like, oh, I'm going to be an artist and be creative. You actually have to take action and do it every day, like going to the gym, because it is a muscle. And if you don't work it out, you get weaker and weaker. And then you have to like start flexing again and doing the stuff at the gym. That's what I've come to realize, because when I'm like working out hard at like thinking of creative ideas, they come flowing and pouring in. If I take a break, it's good. You take a pause, you get re-inspired. It's like when you do something and you try too hard at it too, and then you stop and you take a break and then you come back. It's like
kind of like writer's block for like folks who write.
Yeah.
It's like you want to just take a little break, come back with a fresh mind.
Yeah, but I think with like writer's block, you just got to beat it down, dude. You just got to do it, you know? Because
power through.
You just got to power through.
It sounds like you did, like you said, didn't really study business. You hadn't really seen how businesses operate growing up. You worked here and there, but it wasn't like, building a business. What were some of the early maybe things that, I don't want to call them mistakes, but lessons that you learned like while building this thing into real business? Because at some point you have to make sure that the money's there to keep sustaining the business and paying whoever you're paying and all that kind of stuff. What were some of those early lessons is there anything that in particular you could share?
Well, yeah, one of my early mentors, this guy was saying, Bruce Woznicki, who's a super successful businessman, always told me, lead with revenue. And I was like, okay. And then he was like, lead with revenue and get a good bookkeeper and accountant. And that's like exactly what I did, right? Someone that could, tell me, hey, you spend too much, like what's, your cost of materials here is exponentially going up. Like, you got to watch out for this. And then you fly. That's like, sort of like the 101 that I got. And, and it wasn't, I was I bootstrapped this business the whole way through. I've had really limited resources. I'm so grateful to say, like, in this climate or whatever, like we're cash flow positive, like we're growing like 30% year over year.
You got the lingo down.
I've learned, but I learned this stuff over the years, and to me, it's like, I always bring the metaphor. It's like, look, you can give me a book on how to drive a car, and like, I'll fucking read it forwards and backwards like a million times, and I'll get into the car and I'll be like, where do I put the key? How do I turn it? To me, business is like a life experience. Like, throw me the keys to the car, and in 15 minutes I'll be doing like wheelies and donuts and fucking shit out in the parking lot.
Well, it sounds like you're fearless, right?
But that's how I learned.
It seems like you, even though you don't know what you're jumping into, you're just doing it anyways. I think that a lot of people, a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, you allude to the fact that this isn't necessarily that podcast, but it is. This is the story that's going to resonate with most people that don't necessarily know what they're taking the dive into. They're just trying to dive in, trying to figure things out. I mean, did that not scare you at all?
I look back and it scares me more than it scares me at the actual time. But I look back and I'm like, holy shit,
what was I doing?
What was I doing? That was insane. This is so crazy. Like, I did this on my own with like a nominal investment going into it with like just and been so grateful that that wasn't the case. But I look back and I get more scared than when I do it. Like, and I always tell people, man, if I would have known what I would have known back then today, like if I would have known what I know today back then, like probably wouldn't have started. But it's just like, you just go through the weeds, man. You're just going through it, and you know, I look back and those are some of the funnest and happiest times I had. And like, you know, you didn't know if you were going to make it next month, if that client was going to come through and like save the month, save the day.
And how long did that last? Because this is something that obviously, you know, a lot of times one of the advices you get in business is like build something that's repeatable. You can get repeat customers to keep coming back all the time, so you can actually build like a, you know, a profitable like revenue model. But you're sort of in the luxury business where it's not as common, you know, it's not as frequent. I should say, like it's a little bit more few and far between, or perhaps it's not anymore at this point. But building,
we have a lot of repeat clients.
Yeah,
you know.
But when you first try to get those clients, it's you're building towards that, right? Like when did that kind of cycle sort of become a little bit more clear in terms of, all right, we're good now. Like we don't have to worry.
It still isn't, you know. I'm still.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's fashion is a funny business, you know. It's a very, can imagine, very different industry than, you know, a tech or a real estate. It's you know, you're dealing with consumers and people, you know, that, to be quite honest, you know, it's like I have my vision and my dream and my idea, and people, you know, understand it and wanna like, but no one needs 10 pairs of shoes, right? No one needs like 20 denim jeans. Like, you guys probably have that, you know. We all do. We're just consumers, you know. But like, the reality is like people evolve and change and want beautiful things, and I think like that's what fashion offers, you know.
Yeah.
But I think in a lot of ways, like what I tell my clients is like, look, a hat you have today, you'll have it in like 50 years and you'll give it down to your kids. Not many other categories or accessories like can you buy and have forever. Like this is one of those pieces. So I'm like very proud to say that.
Yeah.
To me, that's sustainable.
I mean, exactly. When you're talking about sustainability, you're mentioning plastics, but like even in fashion right now with fast fashion and all that stuff, it's not designed to last a long time.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people today are using that buzzword of sustainability, but I don't really think that they know exactly what they mean. They're throwing it around. Yeah. Like what we do here is sustainable. To me, sustainability is, you know, utilizing the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. And a lot of people are like, oh yeah, like my brand's sustainable. I'm like, in like what ways? You're making things that are petroleum based that are like, right. You know, that
which is like the number one
break
polluting
down
industry.
Like in like, you know, a year that you need to buy again. Like that's fully not sustainable at all.
Nick, we're obviously surrounded by a lot of hats, and that's the business that you're in. But I also see backpacks and candles. I saw T-shirts online. I mean, are you thinking about expanding the brand and the offering to even more than just hats?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I started this brand, my core category is to this day is headwear, is hats. But, you know, I always looked at fashion designers like Ralph Lauren, like Coco Chanel, like Halston, and, you know, like a lot of others that started out with a simple accessory. You know, like Ralph, as everyone knows, started out with a tie. Coco Chanel started with a hat. So did Halston. And they built their empire. They built their brand based on a category. And I think it was really important for me to make my mark on one thing rather, because, you know, that was all the investment that I could have. So I was going to make a splash with what I did and wanted to be the leader of my category, which I, you know, humbly think I am. And be able to like go in through the industry through the back door rather than try to be like, here's my bags and here's my hat and here's my wallets and here's my like clothes. And like, you know, you want to be known for you know, you want to be known for a thing. And I think that's where I was able to get my entry card in. And now, because, you know, I have a vision and I have an idea and I have a creative expression, is where like I have the need personally to get into these other categories, these other accessories that like I'm very passionate about as well, you know? Like otherwise I end up becoming the Mad Hatter. Like I'll go crazy.
Yeah. How do you envision this all playing out? Obviously it's named after you, it's your namesake. It's like I'm sure you're very close to it, but do you see yourself running the business and doing this for the rest of your life? Or do you have other sort of plans for yourself outside of it?
Yeah, no, we definitely, you know, I've just hired, which is so amazing to say, but in June I hired my first COO, and that's been such an amazing learning experience for me to really understand the inner working of my brand and just business in general. And we have a lot of interesting, plans going forward that we're currently, that we're looking into. But yeah, I mean, it's to continue to grow my vision in this empire and to go beyond just headwear for sure.
Nick, early on in the episode, you talk about being an introvert, almost being shy, you said. You said early on you were a kid who was shy. Um, how does that play into you being a leader now, right? I mean, being the face of, your brand, what do you see as the strengths of you as an introvert, um, you know, growing this business?
It's a really good question. I mean, it's just who I am. I think I think it's part of my creative process. I have to just, have to. I don't know. I mean, sorry, I'm jumbling over my words, but I think I don't think you necessarily need to be an extrovert to be a successful fashion designer. I think some of the artists I respect and love the most are people that are weird, introverted people, and I think I'm a weird, introverted person too. Is that?
I love it, and the reason I ask is because you see a lot of these entrepreneurs, founders that are so out there. They're so extroverted and they're just so all over the place, and they're always just talking and doing whatever it is, right? And I'm not discrediting any of their efforts, but I also just think that there's a lot of people out there that are introverted, that just in general they're not entrepreneurs, but also they are entrepreneurs. And I love that just the whole time I've been thinking right now. I love that you are an introvert because I want those that are listening that resonate with you to understand. You don't have to be out there all the time. You don't have to have your face all over the place. You don't have to have all these videos and stuff just all about you, and just be head down getting shit done.
And thanks for saying that, because what it makes me think is that story that we've all heard. It's like you go into a bar and it's the guy that's like all big and loud and that's like the one to watch out for. It's like, no, dude, it's the quiet dude in the corner that knows like 3 different martial arts that'll come and fucking whip that dude's ass, man. It's like the same thing. It's like, you know what? You don't have to like be loud and like tell everybody like I'm doing this, that, and the other. It's like, just be the humble guy. I'm like about humility. That's my fucking thing, dude. Like, and I see that in other people, and I'm like, that's a quality that like I appreciate and admire, And I don't think that a super successful businessman needs to be loud and talk about his profit and loss, his P&L and all the money that he has. And I don't think that that's the requirement to being a successful entrepreneur at all.
Yeah, unless it's you're a public company and you have to give an earnings call, and that's a whole different ball game. This has been an amazing conversation, man. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your story. It's awesome to learn.
This was amazing
about the backstory of Nick Fouquet, and it's amazing to see what you've built, and we're excited to see what comes next.
Thank you guys so much.